All right, I'm going to get started. I imagine there'll be people trickling in over the next few minutes. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from today. Thank you for participating in today's webinar. My name is Christine Crosby. I'm the Managing Director of Strategic Initiatives at the Canadian Association of Schools of Nursing. CASN is a national organization representing schools of nursing, offering baccalaureate and graduate level education programs in Canada. And our mission is to support excellence in nursing education, research, and scholarship. Today, I'm very pleased to be hosting this presentation of Virtu-WIL, a national project to develop and implement virtual simulations to support healthcare education in Canada. I want to begin today's webinar by acknowledging that we are gathering virtually today from many of the traditional and unceded territories of the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples in all parts of Canada. Here in Ottawa, I'm joining you from the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples. In today's webinar, you will have the opportunity to learn about the background and development process of the virtual simulations, how to access them, and practical tips and ideas for how to implement them in nursing education. Our presenters will take about 30 minutes to share this information with you, and then we will have about 20 minutes for questions. A couple of housekeeping items before we get going. You will be on mute for the duration of the presentation today. And then for the Q&A session, you have the option to type your questions in the Q&A box, or if you wish to speak with the presenters, you can raise your hand and I will unmute you. You're welcome to ask questions in French or in English. And this session is being recorded, and that will be circulated to you in the near future. And we will also be sharing a copy of the slide deck so that you may access some of the links that are going to be shared with you today. Now I am going to introduce our three presenters for today's session. Dr. Timothy Willett is the President and CEO of Simulation Canada, the national interprofessional nonprofit network that supports the advancement of simulation in healthcare and beyond. Tim has been working at the intersection of healthcare, education, and technology and leadership since 2005. Dr. Sandra Goldsworthy is a nursing education leader who is internationally recognized as a simulation and critical care expert, researcher, and author. She is the recipient of the International Nursing Association for Clinical Simulation and Learning Excellence in Research Award and the Canadian Nurses Association Order of Merit in Education. Sandra has over 70 peer-reviewed publications and frequently presents her research nationally and internationally. Dr. Goldsworthy is currently a professor in the School of Nursing at Nipissing University. Dr. Goldsworthy is passionate about improving patient safety and provider preparation through simulation. Her research program focuses on the impact of simulation in building competence in recognition and response to the deteriorating patient, reduction of medication errors, and improving health team communication competencies through interprofessional simulation education. Joelle Deschambault is a project manager in the Government and Stakeholder Partnerships Division at Colleges and Institutes Canada. CICAN is the national and international voice of Canada's largest post-secondary education network. It advocates, builds capacity, and drives knowledge to strengthen Canada's publicly supported colleges, institutes, cégeps, and polytechnics. In the past 2 years, Joelle has been leading the planning and implementation of the Virtu-WIL project. And I will now be turning things over to Joelle to start our presentation today.
Thank you so much, Christine. I will be sharing my screen. So thank you everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Bienvenue à ce webinaire. First of all, I would like to thank CASN for having us today, Christine for organizing and facilitating this webinar and giving us the opportunity to present the Virtu-WIL initiative and also the pool of resources that is now available for Canadian educators. I will also mention that I'm coughing a bit today, so I may need to put myself on mute for a second here and there, so apologies in advance for that. So to start this webinar, I would like to give you a bit more context on the creation of Virtu-WIL before we jump into what exactly is the Virtu-WIL project. So Virtu-WIL is, oh, just a minute. So Virtu-WIL is led by Colleges and Institute Canada in partnership with Simulation Canada in collaboration with Canadian Colleges, Institute and University. So there were many goals or objectives underlining this initiative, but an essential one was to increase the availability of virtual simulation in healthcare education. But not only did we wanted to increase the availability and the accessibility, we also wanted to make sure that the virtual simulation that we were about to create were presenting more diversity, inclusivity, and more representation of all people and realities in this country. So to do so, to create these resources, our strategy was always to focus on collaboration. So we gathered experts and educators across the country with the goal of creating more capacity, of strengthening the already existing community of practice through more collaboration and strengthening partnership and creating new partnership. Finally, our ultimate goal was to offer new innovative work integrated learning opportunities to healthcare students using virtual simulation, for them to gain crucial workplace experience in a context of clinical placement shortages that was already existing, but that has been exacerbated by the pandemic. And also this increasing need for more virtual learning options that are easy to use, easy to share, and accessible. So based on these objectives that I just presented to you, here is what the Virtu-WIL project consists of. So as I mentioned briefly, this is a pan-Canadian work integrated learning opportunity for healthcare students in colleges and universities using virtual simulation. This project is funded by the Government of Canada Innovative Work Integrated Learning Initiative, or what is called I-WIL. The project started in April 2021 with an original timeline of a year. But since then, we had the great pleasure to see the project extended until the end of March 2024, with the addition of new and very interesting activities. So the project is bringing together healthcare educators from coast to coast to develop this simulation in 4 healthcare programs. The 3 original programs, which were nursing, paramedicine, and medical lab technology, and we are adding sonography this year. The virtual simulation are developed on multiple platforms that were selected through an open procurement process. Then we created the virtual program, which integrates the virtual simulation that are created by our educators. So the virtual program consisted of, for students to complete a set of several simulations that are selected by their instructor. And this is followed by structured interaction with employers, or what we call industry partner or clinical partner. So these clinical partners take an important role in the debrief of the virtual simulation. And now the resources and the simulation that were created during phase 1 are available to Canadian educators for free. And Tim will talk to you more about that in a minute. So as I mentioned, this project was all about collaboration, and our achievement and the success of this project really lies on the shoulders of many partners and collaborators. So during the first year, we were able to bring together 37 post-secondary institutions, so educators and experts from PSI, to be authors of simulation, to support the EDI aspect of the project, to help us develop the program, and to deliver the program to the student. So on top of that, we can count on representatives from professional associations, such as Canadian Association of School of Nursing. We had more than 35 clinical partners that participated in debrief session with students. As I mentioned, we had 7 different simulation platform or supplier. So together we're able to we calculate more than 80 partnership, an impressive pool of new digital shareable resources, and thousands of innovative work integrated learning opportunities for students. So now we are in the second phase of Virtu-WIL, and we are able this year to, again, work with educators and from across the country to develop 54 new simulations. As I mentioned, we will have new simulation for sonography this year. We also, during the last year and working with people that has a lot of expertise, we recognize the need and the value of providing more professional development on the implementation of virtual simulations. So how to embed these virtual simulation into your curriculum or into a learning experience. So we are happy this year also to partner with Simulation Canada to develop a new workshop for implementers. And this workshop will soon be available and open for registration. And again, I think Tim will mention a little bit more about that. This year, we also have the incredible opportunity to convene an evaluation working group that will be going a bit deeper and assessing the effectiveness and impact of the virtual simulation and this program on healthcare student learning, competency development, and how this is really helping them transition into practice. And of course, we are delivering the program to another 3,000 students until the end of this project. So I know Sandra will explore this aspect in her presentation, the feedback from like how useful this can be for student learning and how as a post-secondary institution, they've been using the virtual simulation and their experience with delivering the program, the project. But I would like to let you know a little bit more about the feedback that we collected during the first phase, both from students and post-secondary institutions. So we had a set of PSI coming from 7 provinces in Canada that have used the simulation in delivering the program last year. Most, if not all of them, has been using the simulation as an extracurricular activity. Our timeline in the first year was very, very tight. But we're seeing this year more and more educators that are integrating the virtual simulation into their curriculum. So from the feedback we received from students, they told us about many ways that they think this was useful for them. So a few examples, they thought that it was complementing a theory class with really practical example, that it's helping them to prepare for exam or for a certification, that it was particularly useful in preparation for clinical placement. And this is exposing students to a diversity of clinical situations that they may not encounter during their clinical placement or practicum. In the feedback we received from students, many also mentioned that the simulation contribute to boost their confidence. They really appreciated the safe learning experience, the possibility to learn from their mistake in a safe, risk-free environment, free of judgment as well, free of too much pressure. The simulation also gave them the opportunity to really understand the rationale between correct answer or not so good answer, an incorrect answer, and also to be confronted with very challenging situations that push them to enhance some skill, such as communication with patients and the care team, decision-making, establishing priorities, showing empathy, to name only a few. From the institution, other benefits that were mentioned by the institution was really the ability for the students to redo the simulation and repeat them as many times as needed. How this was providing, again, a safe learning environment, and also the possibility to identify some learning gaps from students and address them to better prepare them for the future and their future in the workforce. As for the debriefing session, the educators were really impressed by the conversation they were able to have with their learners and this connection that they were able to make with the industry partner. So it's for them, it was a strong learning experience that helped build confidence again for the students and optimize the learning outcomes of their courses. So as I mentioned, Sandra will talk to you a bit more about that. So we were really lucky to have Sandra Goldsworthy from Nipissing University, being an amazing collaborator of CICAN and SIM Canada since the start of this project. They've been involved in many aspects of Virtu-WIL, including developing the simulation, helping us develop the program, delivering the program, and now we are also happy to count Sandra as part of our evaluation process. So Sandra, I will give the floor to you.
Thanks very much, Joelle. And like Joelle, I have a bit of a cough today, so hopefully I don't have to go on mute, but we'll see how it goes. I wanted to start off by saying it's so nice to see so many of you from across Canada joining today and also internationally. I'm really glad to have you with us today. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why Nipissing University participated in this wonderful project. We were quite excited to participate in Virtu-WIL. During the pandemic, of course, like many of you, we used virtual simulations almost exclusively for our students, and that's what kept our students going. So we were really excited to be part of a project that was going to be developing new peer-reviewed virtual simulations. Because as many of us know, this is a teaching strategy that can take us well beyond the pandemic, as it has so far. It's allowed us also to easily add simulations into our programs. And we've been very appreciative of all of the work that's been done with the Virtu-WIL program with, for instance, the pre-briefing templates, the debriefing templates, and some of the facilitator guides, all very helpful for faculty to be able to easily integrate simulation into their programs. So Joelle, I'll just get you to go to the next slide, if you don't mind. And it all started with a lot of communication, just to explain what Virtu-WIL was. And I mean, even backing up, explaining to program leadership, to our own School of Nursing, and our instructors what virtual simulation is, first of all, but also what the Virtu-WIL program was all about. So we did have strong buy-in with instructors and senior admin over time, I would say, because it required a lot of communication just to explain what we were doing, how this works with students, and so on. We know that there's tons of research now on virtual simulation and more coming to show that virtual simulation is evidence-based and it does increase competence and confidence amongst our students. So just go to the next slide. Thank you. And so in terms of embedding virtual simulations, first of all, as Joelle said, we participated in phase 1 and we're participating in phase 2. I'm also on the evaluation team as well. But during phase 1, we created 4 virtual simulations and tested those out amongst our students. So we actually had 92 students complete the whole Virtu-WIL phase 1 project. And I can tell you, they were very excited about it. A lot of the comments that Joelle just shared is what we heard as well. They found the simulations were realistic. They found that it was really helpful for them going into clinical. It linked the theory to the practice, and they felt more confident about different situations. And so we did participate in and are participating in phase 2 right now. And we have heavily continued with injecting and embedding virtual sim post-pandemic. So although we used it completely during the pandemic, we're threading it through all of our programs now. In fact, in some of our courses, we've actually increased virtual simulation in a number of the courses that we teach in our program by 100%. So where there was no virtual simulation pre-pandemic, there is now, for instance, in courses that have 6 modules over 12 weeks, we've embedded 1 simulation per module. So really, you could say it's increased by 600%, I guess, in that case. And we'll just go to the next slide. So in terms of embedding virtual simulations, some of the strategies that we've used is, first of all, we have tried different debriefing methods. It really depends on the simulation It depends on the learner, and it depends on the sensitivity of the material. But we have tried self-debriefs. We've also used facilitated small group debriefs with large classrooms. These have been very effective. And I find even when they're optional for students, the students all turn up. They're very engaged with virtual simulations. They really want to have an open discussion with the debriefing portion. And other things we've done is we've had them for assignments where we've awarded marks, usually for about 2.5 to 5%, and higher sometimes. We've had them submit reflective papers and also self-debrief. So they may submit either of those and then also attend a facilitated debrief. Okay, Joelle, good timing. I was ready for that one. So some of the lessons we've learned is that, first of all, as Joelle said, professional development is very important for faculty to understand this. When we went into emergency remote teaching, it was kind of as we all know, one day we were not in the pandemic, the next day we were, everything was shut down. Now we really need to backtrack and fill those gaps with faculty development. So it is really important that the facilitator has a good understanding of virtual sim and that they actually try it themselves. That way they can understand what the student's encountering. Other lessons we've learned is that students were very engaged with the virtual simulations, and a lot of students told us they found them very realistic. There were several different platforms that they tried the virtual simulations with, and we heard that frequently. Another strategy we put into place at Nipissing, and maybe some of you have done this as well, is that we use co-debriefing. And what we did is we paired up experienced debriefers with people that were maybe more novice or hadn't debriefed in the virtual simulation environment at all. But what that did is it actually built expertise within our faculty, and also it helped build confidence as well amongst the faculty members in the debrief. There's lots of advantages to co-debriefing, even in the in-person situation. I think the other lesson here is that we know that we need to ensure that those learning objectives align with the course content and enhance preparation for the pre-brief and debrief. So we want to make sure that the learning objectives are at the right level. And this is where the Virtu-WIL scenarios, one of the parts of them is that you can actually look and see if they're for first-year students or senior students, and that's really helpful. Okay, Joelle, we'll just go to the next one. We know this from the literature and the research that repeating scenarios, we know this for in-person simulation, but we have found this with virtual simulation as well, is that the more times a student repeats the scenario, even if they did really well the first time, it can tremendously build their confidence and work towards mastery in that scenario. So that's, I think, a very important lesson learned. With schools of nursing or faculties of nursing, or any faculties that are using simulation, I think it's really important that, and we're learning to do this, is to develop a strategy across all courses, across all programs, so that way we know where certain virtual simulations are being used. And this will help us avoid duplication of learning and avoid any gaps as well. I mentioned this already, but just making sure that the level of the simulation fits with the learner level and their ability. Otherwise, it's going to tremendously increase the cognitive load and be very difficult for them. I would also mention there's some really great IPE scenarios in the Virtu-WIL collection. So some of those might work really well for you. And I wanted to just end by leaving you with a couple of these resources. Some of you may have seen these ones before. The first is a paper that Margaret Verkal and I published a little while ago, but what it is it's a practical approach to debriefing in a facilitated virtual synchronous environment. So it's really a step-by-step approach. And the next one is Virtual Simulation and Educators Toolkit. It's free, by the way, and it was developed by a large team. It is free. It's available online at this link here. And I think Christine mentioned we'd send these PowerPoints out after. This is really a complete guide for educators with downloads, videos, all kinds of great information for faculty development and virtual simulation. This was something that we desperately needed during the pandemic, but now it is available. So I just wanted to end with that and turn it over to you, Tim. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Sandra. My name is Tim Willett. I'm joining you from just northwest of Ottawa today, and I'm the president and CEO of Simulation Canada. We are the not-for-profit interprofessional network in Canada that helps support people working in simulation, primarily in healthcare, but we're starting to see involvement from outside of healthcare as well. It's wonderful to see so many familiar names on this list, names of people who have helped to develop the Virtu-WIL simulations and who are already implementing them, as well as many new names, folks who I haven't had the chance to meet yet from all across Canada. And I saw Brazil and Qatar as examples of international participants as well. I want to start by just defining what we mean by virtual simulation in this sense. What we're talking about is sometimes called screen-based simulations. So these are games that can be played. They're hosted on websites, and you can access them using a computer or tablet or phone. No special equipment required. And even with some limited bandwidth, internet bandwidth, these games can be accessible. So we're not talking about virtual reality here, where you need a special headset, but rather these screen-based simulations. As Joelle mentioned, in the first round, games were developed for nursing. About half of them are for nursing, and then as well as paramedicine and medical lab science. They're built on 7 different platforms. All of these simulations were peer-reviewed. So during the authoring process, we had a robust peer review process where expert authors and educators from different institutions across Canada reviewed each other's works and provided feedback. We also had a dedicated equity, diversity, and inclusion committee that reviewed all the simulations for EDI content to ensure that they were safe and respectful. They also all went through a peer or a pilot testing process at the end, where they were tested with a student panel before being published. What's really wonderful, all 137 of these are free. They're all freely available. They require no special memberships to be able to access them. In some cases, there are 2 platforms where access is restricted to Canadian educators just because of the nature of the technological platforms. But for about 90% of these simulations, they are freely available to educators or students from anywhere in the world. Also wanted to mention that the source content of these simulations is open. So for any Canadian educator on request, if you find a simulation that almost addresses what you need but isn't quite right, you can request the source content and make adaptations to these virtual simulations to contextualize it for your own use. So as we look through these, even if you're coming in from nursing, it could be that you come across one from paramedicine, for example, that touches on a topic that you want to support your students with, but the contextualization of that scenario isn't quite right. If you're feeling inspired, then you could request that source content and adapt it to make it more relevant to your own context. Next slide, please. Here are 4 example screenshots. There are 7 platforms we use. There's some similarities among some of the platforms, but I just wanted to provide a very quick glimpse of what 4 of them look like. So in the upper left is a platform called Body Interact. This is a very interactive platform, especially good for acute care cases, because you encounter the patient and then you have to make decisions. So you have to choose what to assess, and you can do interventions and see the result of those interventions almost immediately. Like you can put on oxygen or you can give fluids and see what that impact is. In the bottom left is a platform called Stitch Media, which is a media company out of Toronto. And they were really good at developing narrative-based simulations where they can construct powerful stories and characters and build senses of empathy and relationship building into their scenarios. In the top right is a platform called PCS Spark. It actually runs on artificial intelligence and natural language processing. So when you meet a patient in PCS Spark, you turn on your microphone and you can speak to them. You can ask questions and you'll get answers back. So for higher level students, especially, where you don't want to queue them and provide a list of options, but rather try to replicate a clinical situation that is more open and unstructured. And as an expert, you need to decide what questions you're going to ask and what your priorities are. This helps recreate that experience. And at the bottom right is a platform called Affinity Learning, again, a Canadian developed solution, where you build almost like choose your own adventure type stories where you can meet a patient either through photo and text, or many cases were built using video. You can learn about a patient or client, and as the story goes on, you have to make decisions. You're presented with information, you have to make decisions along the way, and you get feedback on the strength of those decisions. And in some cases, a story unfolds in different ways depending on the decisions you make. Right, so next is talking about how to access these. So the two phases or two steps to accessing them. One is to use a catalog to find out what simulations are available and how to access them. And then the second step is to distribute them to students or to faculty. So in the first step, we'll just be talking about discovering the simulations and deciding which, if any, suit your needs. And then in the second step, we'll be sending them out to students so that students or faculty using them don't have to go through the whole catalog. They can actually just go directly to the simulations. So step one is about finding the relevant simulations, and they're all cataloged in a resource called the Sim Scenario Exchange that lives on the Simulation Canada website. So you can go to simulationcanada.ca, and under resources, you'll find Sim Scenario Exchange. There's a QR code there that'll take you directly to it. The Sim Scenario Exchange hosts all kinds of different simulation scenarios, including ones that are documented on paper and meant for mannequin-based simulations or standardized patient encounters, but it also includes all 137 of the virtual simulations developed through Virtu-WIL. So a few notes on this page. You can change language. So if you're looking for French language scenarios, you can switch to the French version of this site. You can search any scenario by keyword. So if you're looking for a particular discipline or area of nursing or a particular author, you can search there. And on the right side, you'll see some filters. So if you wanted to restrict your view to only the Virtu-WIL simulations, you could do that. If you wanted to limit the profession to nursing, you could do that. And if you see a simulation that might address the topic you want, you click on the details button there. And if you click on details, that takes you to this next screen where you'll find more granular information about the scenario, who authored it, a summary of the scenario, its learning objectives, and you can get a sense for how well this may fit into your curriculum. At this point, in order to access the simulation itself, we ask you to log in to our account. It is a free sign up. We use that to help us track how many people are viewing the catalog and who's accessing these simulations. But there's no need to be a member of Simulation Canada. It's totally free to create an account, and then you can log in. And so once you log in, you see the access information for a simulation. Since these are virtual simulations, they don't live on our website. They live on other websites, platforms. So you'll see in the middle there the link to the external link to the simulation itself. Many of these simulations, the authors also offered a facilitation guide that provides some tips for pre-briefing and for debriefing the simulation, and it'll be linked there. And if you're interested in accessing the source materials, you'll find a link there as well, where you can request the access to the source materials. So if you were to click the link to the simulation itself, this would now take you away from the Simulation Canada website to wherever the simulation itself is hosted. And most of these simulations have a landing page for the simulation, where again, you see the summary of the simulation. And if this is indeed a simulation you want to use, to be able to share it with students, all you need to do is copy and paste the URL at the top of the screen, or many of the simulation platforms, the landing page itself has a share button where you can get a link, so that other faculty or the students using this, they don't have to go through the sim scenario exchange. You can just share that direct link with them. And in many cases, without creating an account or without having to log in, they can simply directly access and begin playing the simulation. There are a couple platforms because of their nature where you'll be asked to create a student account. But again, that's free for all Canadian students, and a pretty straightforward process. A few recommendations from our perspective if you're thinking of adopting any of these. So start with the sim scenario exchange to find the relevant simulations. It's really important that as an educator you play through and test out the simulation, even if it looks like the topic and the learning objectives make it sound like this is at the right level for your students. It's really important to play through it yourself to verify that it is appropriate for them. And once you learn more about the simulation by playing through, it'll help you also pre-brief your students so they know what to expect. We strongly encourage professional development in virtual sim implementation. Like any form of simulation, there are established skills and best practices for how you would use a virtual simulation with your students, including good practices for pre-briefing and preparing your students and for debriefing students. Through the Virtu-WIL program in the first phase, we offered some online modules on implementing virtual simulation. And we're really excited that over the next couple months, we'll be finalizing and releasing an interactive workshop on implementing simulations. Sandra, who's on the panel with me, is one of the experts involved in developing that, as is Margaret Virtu-WIL, who's a world leader in virtual simulation use, and other Canadian educators. This workshop will be offered free to all Canadian educators and will be offered in both English and French. Make sure you plan some time for pre-briefing. In many cases, virtual simulation may be new to your students. And even if it's not, then these particular platforms and the way they work and the expectations might be new to your students. So make sure you do plan in time for pre-briefing and that you schedule a debriefing session. So emerging evidence is showing that even though in virtual simulations, some feedback is built into the simulation and students can replay them, there's added value in having a synchronous debriefing session, whether it's in person or virtual, with educators and a content expert. Some of the benefits to using virtual simulations, they're free, of course, which is always appreciated. They're all peer reviewed. They're all authored and reviewed by Canadian educators. It'll allow you to test different platforms and technologies. So you try out a few different simulations, they may be on different technologies, and you can see what each of these different platforms allow students to do and how they present cases differently and present cognitive and clinical reasoning challenges differently. They're scalable, which is a great benefit of virtual simulation, is once it's built, it's very easy and cost effective to distribute to dozens or hundreds of students. And it's repeatable. So if you want students to go through it a second time or third time, if they want to go through it a second time or a third time, unlike in-person simulations where you need to reschedule another simulation session, students can repeat these all they want. It helps to build internal capacity. So by working through the Virtu-WIL student project, or by participating in, say, the professional development workshop that we'll be offering, we can help to build that internal capacity for simulation, and particularly virtual simulation, and also generate an interest in authoring. Some of these platforms actually offer free accounts for authoring simulations. So if you or other educators are intrigued and find it useful what you're working with, which I'm confident you will, and you'd like to try a hand at creating your own, many of these platforms offer free ways to do that. Next slide, please. And then just to reemphasize this embedding virtual workshop that is coming soon. This offers very practical advice for educators who are looking to implement and embed virtual simulations in a learning program, whether that's in a formal course or curriculum or as an extracurricular activity. We'll provide some planning templates to help plan that out, provide 2 synchronous online sessions with Canadian experts and peers, so you can use them as a sounding board for your ideas and get advice. And like I mentioned, these would be free to Canadian educators, subsidized through the Virtu-WIL project. So please keep an eye on either the Colleges and Institutes Canada newsletter or the Simulation Canada newsletter. You can find signups for those on our websites, where we'll be announcing when these are available and open for registration. Next slide, Joelle.
Maybe Tim, just to mention also that we have a Virtu-WIL distribution email list. So if people, they can contact us and we can add them to the list to make sure that you get all the announcements. So I think the workshop will definitely go through that list.
And I don't know if it was mentioned too, but I should. There is the phase 2 underway. So there's 50 some more simulations coming, scheduled to be published in around April or May. They'll be finalized and published. So more coming.
So thank you very much, Joelle, Sandra, and Tim, for that presentation that really took it from the top, and I feel like drilled down all the way into how you can access the simulations yourself. So we have about 15 minutes for questions. I noticed there's a few questions in the Q&A box and also some raised hands. So I'm just going to start by reading out those that were posted in the question and answer box, and then we'll give people an opportunity to chat with you. So the first question is, I'm teaching in a pre-health program working through medical terminology at present. Are you aware if there are very simple basic simulations for just learning some basics?
I can respond to that. So these are all designed for students in healthcare programs, but some of them are designed for first-year students and are fairly basic. I don't know if any of them would address clinical terminology per se, but if you're looking for something that could be almost like a contextual experience to help your students learn how some of this language and these terms are used, you might find some of those basic ones to be usable in that sense.
Okay, and then I will do one more from the Q&A box. And it's kind of a two-parter. So in the proposed self-debrief, are students provided with some guiding questions? And then what is the size of your debrief sessions, and are they synchronous?
Okay, I can take that one, Christine. So the self-debrief, yes, they're provided with a list of debrief questions. So very much set up like a debrief, you know, what went well, how did you feel during the scenario, and then questions drilling down into the actual content. So they're given that, they fill those out, and then they return those, they send those into the professor. In terms of the facilitated synchronous debrief, usually on Zoom or some platform like that, or Teams, we recommend 6, and this fits with what the literature says too, about groups of 6 to 10. If you get larger than that, it doesn't allow for a good discussion, and everybody doesn't get to contribute. If you have smaller than that, it's sometimes difficult to get a really robust debriefing discussion going. So 6 to 10 is usually what we recommend, but it can be larger than that as well and still be effective, especially if you have co-debriefers.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sandra. I was going to have a couple of people with raised hands chat with you guys now. So Louise Moyer, I think you should be able to unmute yourself.
So hi, everybody. Hi, Tim and Sandra. It's nice to see you virtually. I just have a quick question. So this looks like wonderful work that you've done. Have you come across in the work in regards to the National Council of State Boards of Nursing simulation study where they said that simulation can account up to 50% of clinical time? Have you found in any of your research or your work how virtual simulation might fit into that study? And is there any research out there that says virtual sim can replace, now that we're kind of coming out of the pandemic? Have you come across any research for that?
Tim, do you want to, or I can answer whichever.
I can start off based on my understanding of the literature is, yes, there's this strong evidence now in place that simulation can be used to augment traditional clinical placements and enhance learning. So I find in simulation communities where the conversation is shifting from simulation versus clinical or simulation replacing clinical to really how can we make best use of each of these modalities to optimize clinical learning and achievement of competencies. So that evidence is in place. There's also strong evidence comparing virtual simulations to in-person simulations, highlighting that yes, they can be as good, but they're also different. They have strengths that in-person simulations can't always offer. And they have weaknesses where in-person simulations are a better modality. So there is that evidence and that comparison in place as well. I haven't seen any studies that make the jump directly from virtual simulation to changes in clinical placement hours. But the logic trail in terms of evidence and in terms of pedagogical theory is there. Sandra, did you want to?
Yeah, I would just add to that. Thanks for your question, Louise. It's a very timely one and a really hot discussion item, you know, in simulation right now. But I think more, as Tim said, we're looking about titration of different modalities for the best possible learning outcomes and performance, right? So for instance, what is the best modality for the, you know, what's the right modality for the right student at the right time? So for instance, a first-year student, should they have more virtual simulation to provide them context? Whereas, you know, a fourth-year student, maybe more in-person simulation. So how does one work best with the other, and how can we titrate that? And I think that's where we're going to start to see more of the research moving towards. And also, how do we sequence those modalities? When do you use virtual simulation? Do you use it prior to the in-person? We know that works. There's research about that. How do you sequence it? So it is a complicated question, but I think that's one of the things we're trying to understand right now, especially during the pandemic, when we saw how effective virtual simulation was with our students, despite the fact they couldn't go into clinical or labs.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to go to our next raised hand from Lucy. Lucy, you should be able to chat with the panelists now. Lucy, can you hear me? Okay, we will maybe come back to you in a few minutes. So there was another question in the Q&A box saying, for the simulations, do you think they will align well with the next generation of the NCLEX? I know you touched on clinical reasoning. I don't know if anyone wants to tackle that one.
Sandra, I'd be happy to, but I am not particularly familiar with the next generation NCLEX and what it'll entail. I'm not sure if you are, and maybe willing to.
Sure. I think it may be not as sorry, I'm losing my voice, but as explicit laid out as next gen NCLEX questions and so on. But in the virtual simulations, it certainly does lend itself to clinical reasoning, to observation for cues, those kinds of components where the next gen that will be coming out in April, right, has broken down to. So I think we haven't necessarily aligned it explicitly, simulations, but definitely they are set up in that way to promote greater clinical judgment in clinical reasoning. Tim, did you have anything to add to that? I mean, I don't think we've been very explicit about that because that really specifically relates to different types of questions per se, that we could actually inject those into our debriefing questions as well.
Yeah, aside to say that these are very clinical scenarios, so they present realistic clinical situations to learners and put learners in the role of the healthcare provider that they're learning to be. And they have to make some decisions and see the impacts of those decisions as they go.
I think Joelle wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, thank you, Christine. It's just that there's a few questions we have answered through the Q&A box, but I thought I would summarize some of them because I think it would be interesting for everyone to know. So there was a question about French simulation. Donc, juste pour les francophones, je voulais vous mentionner que nous avons en ce moment 35 simulations qui sont disponibles en français. Certaines qui ont été faites directement en français du début jusqu'à la fin. D'autres qui sont des simulations en anglais, mais qui ont des sous-titres et toute la documentation est faite en français. Donc, c'est vraiment seulement le vidéo là, qui est en anglais, mais avec les sous-titres. So mentioning that we have approximately 25% of our simulations that are in French or available in French. Also, there was a question about the availability of the resources. So until when they would be available for free. So to mention that they will be accessible and free for as long as we can. We have negotiated at least until 2026 for most of these platforms, but some of them will be available after that. But of course, we're also in a discussion about how to make sure that these simulations are up to date and maintained over time. There was another one I wanted to mention. So if you have problem accessing one of the simulations, there's, as Tim mentioned, there's two platforms that you have to request an account. It's easy, but it's an extra step. So if you have any issue or you're not figuring out easily how to do that, please do not hesitate to reach out to either Simulation Canada or CICAN team. So there's a slide with our information that will be shared with you. And then I will let you, Christine, continue with the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Joelle. There was a question posted in the chat. Are there any simulations addressing racism?
Yes, there are some that have content on racism. There's some that have content on microaggressions. There's some that have content on trauma-informed care, I believe. What really impressed me when we began this process is I assumed that many of the authors would be interested in more technical skills, about diagnosing or treating or managing a certain condition, but was incredible how many were interested in the interpersonal and the non-technical skills. So a lot of these simulations address communication, collaboration, advocacy, relationship building, and other non-technical parts of healthcare, which is awesome. Katrina, I did a quick search for racism and only one scenario came up, but I'm pretty sure that's not the only scenario that touches on issues of racism. So you might have to do a little more creative digging through the scenarios, but I'm sure you'll find some there.
I would also just add, Tim, to don't limit yourself to just the nursing simulations. Like when you go to look for simulations, maybe just keep all, because if you go through them, for instance, some of the paramedic scenarios or the IPE scenarios might be really helpful for you. So I would just say, you know, that you can branch out and don't limit yourself to the nursing ones. But also, Tim, what you were saying is that some of the, for instance, team communication and some of the IPE is embedded within, you know, some of the scenarios. So it may not come up right away, but when you do a little bit of digging, usually it does though, when you're looking for a specific topic.
So I think I'll just bring up one more question from our Q&A box, realizing that we're out of time, or nearly out of time. And this one is for Sandra, just talking about working with smaller groups of 6 to 8 students. How do you deal with the resource intensity required of facilitators to be engaged in the process?
Really good point, because we have very large classes sometimes. So what I use is self-debriefs. For one, that can be one way of handling that. The other thing is that when you're planning for a course or building a certain course, then that's when we need to lay out what kind of human resources are needed for instance, for the debriefings. If you're going to do 6 to 10 really is what's recommended, but I have done larger. And sometimes I've given students options too, self-debrief versus attending. What I do find though is that they all want to attend, so then they sign up, but that can be, so I would suggest a self-debrief or building it in at the beginning of a course so that you do have the human resources that you need, and it does adhere with best practices. So that is the best way to do it for students, if it's possible.
Okay, thank you very much, Sandra, for that answer. I just want to say again that we are recording this and it is going to be circulated to everyone who registered. And we're also going to be sharing a PDF of the PowerPoint. And with our last moments, I'll just turn it over to our panelists to see if there's any last words that anyone wanted to share.
I'll just add in that thank you for joining today, and please do feel free to explore and share this with colleagues, because they exist and they're ready to be used. If you have challenges accessing anything, Joelle kindly shared an email address, virtu-will@collegesinstitutes.ca. If you come across any challenges accessing them or questions, you could use that as your first point of contact. And then someone there can help direct whether that's a question that CI can help address, or that Simulation Canada can help address, or that one of the technical platforms can help address. There was also a question about continuing professional development and using these with nurses in practice. Yes, in fact, some of them are already being used. I believe some of the colleges and universities who started implementing this brought on clinical partners, so nurses in practice, to help debrief. And then those nurses in practice turned around and began using some of those for the ongoing professional development of their colleagues. So especially some of the more advanced ones would indeed be appropriate.
Thank you, Tim. Christine, I just want to mention thank you for Cassen for hosting this webinar. Thank you to everybody who's been logging in today. And as Tim mentioned, please feel free to reach out to us anytime. We have a whole team dedicated to this. And I just want to say we've been really flabbergasted by the engagement and passion of the community, the healthcare community across the country. And we're really happy that we're able to make this a reality, and that we are able to continue this year as well and next year. So thanks to everybody.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone. And you'll be hearing from me soon with a link to the presentation recording and the PDF. Take care, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.